Hi, my name is Amit Bijlani, and today we're going to look at an AJAX service and adding functionality to our already created jQuery mobile app. In our previous workshop, we had created the facade or the structure and layout of our jQuery mobile app, which is the Good Weather mobile app. And we had laid out a left panel and the main content structure. Today, we will look at adding functionality to our weather app, basically going out to a third-party API service or third-party weather service and use their API to access weather data and display it into our jQuery mobile web app. Now, there are several different weather APIs out there. One of them is called Forecast. Now, if you've ever used forecast.io, which is this amazing web app for your desktop or your mobile browser, they also have an API, which is available on developer.forecast.io. You can register for this forecast. I have already registered, so I'm going to simply log in. So once you log in, you see this nice little graph over here where they show you how many API calls you have left for the day. They allow you to have about 1,000 API calls for free per day. And after that, you have to pay them to use the service. Although you can register without using a credit card, which I have done. They have a very easy to use API. They give you a link right there. So if I click on this link, it shows you all the JSON data that is provided to you as part of the API. So the first thing that they provide to you is all the information that's currently available. So now this is JSON data, which is nicely formatted. If you don't have a formatting plugin into your browser, you can search for an extension, at least for Google Chrome, it's called JSON View. If I Google that. So as you can see, I Googled JSON Viewer, and there is a Chrome Web Store plugin called JSON View that helps you display data, JSON data, in this nice, pretty format. So going back to this. So I recommend that you install that plugin if you want to see the JSON data in this nice hierarchical tree view. So here it displays currently the summary, icon, and then it has all this other information about that particular location, which in this case by default is Los Angeles. And if you look at the address bar, there's the latitude and longitude for Los Angeles. And if I collapse the currently, you'll see that it gives you minute by minute data. So every minute what's going on, it also provides you with that information. In addition, it has hourly data, and then it has daily data. So there's a lot of information that's provided to you. Maybe this is a bit overkill for our simple little application because all we are displaying is the current temperature and whether it's partly cloudy or, basic summary text of the weather and the location, although the location is coming from within the app. But I really like the format and ease of use of this API, so that's what we'll use. So let's open up Sublime with our Good Weather application, and let's go over to our HTML file. So I'm going to put in a script tag here. So the first thing we're going to do is send out an AJAX request. And before I can send out the AJAX request, I'm going to do a document.ready. So if you're familiar with jQuery, this is a very basic function that we use when our page has finished loading, and then we can act upon that page load event. So once document.ready, let's call a function called load weather. Okay. I'm going to create this function called load weather. All right, so what does an AJAX request look like? Well, you need a URL and you need to know what kind of an AJAX request it is. So what is AJAX? Let's consider a regular scenario. You open a site in a browser, which is your client. In turn, it sends a request to the server asking for a page. The server responds with a page, which is usually made up of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Once the page is loaded, the JavaScript within the page has the ability to make requests to the server asynchronously or using the technology called AJAX. Now, AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Although it is not restricted to XML because you can use JSON or known as JavaScript Object Notation. Due to security vulnerabilities, a lot of the sites were getting hacked and the attackers were able to inject malicious scripts in a page. Once the script was in the page, it allowed the attackers to gain access to sensitive information and send it to their servers. This led to identity theft, stolen passwords, and many other nefarious activities. This ability of JavaScript to access any web service from a page is known as cross-site scripting, or XSS. Let's take our Good Weather app as an example. If we had our app hosted on goodweather.com, once the index page was loaded, we could technically use AJAX to access weather data from developer.forecast.io. However, due to the aforementioned problems with XSS or cross-site scripting, web browser vendors like Google, Firefox, and Microsoft decided to disable the ability to allow cross-site script access, which means if your page loaded from one domain, it would not be able to make AJAX calls to another domain. Now, there's a workaround for this, and it is called JSONP, which means JSON with padding. Instead of simply retrieving the data from another site, JSONP instructs the other site that it can send back data using a callback function. Hence, the client and server both need to be aware of how data is accessed. The callback function is a global function on the client side which accepts data coming from the server. Now, Forecast.io recommends that you don't use this solution in real-life applications because your API key is exposed. If you look here into the address bar, that's my API key, which I will be resetting after this workshop, because if anyone uses that API key, then I will hit that 1,000 request limit per day that they have enforced. So you don't want to be sharing this API key all over the place. And one way to prevent from sharing that API key is creating your own service, a server-side component, whether in PHP or Rails or Java or any server-side language that'll talk to Forecast.io, and then you can communicate directly through an AJAX request on your own domain. So in our realm, if we had our application on goodweather.com, we would write this proxy service where we would communicate the app with an AJAX request to our server, and our server in turn would communicate with Forecast.io. But we're not going to do that because that's super complicated. So I'm just going to do a AJAX request using JSONP. All right, so the first thing I need is my forecast URL. And the next thing that I need is my AJAX request. I've already created this request, so I'm going to paste it here, and we will go through it line by line. So this is an AJAX request. It has different attributes, so we need the URL attribute, which is the forecast URL. What kind of a request this is? Well, jQuery provides us the ability to make JSONP calls. So it's asking us for the JSONP callback function. We're just simply calling this JSON callback. Then you have the content type. We know that the data type is JSON, and that's how you specify it, application/JSON. And then finally, the data type. We have to specify what kind of a call this is. So this is a JSONP call. And then you have the two attributes, which is success and error. Once this request is successful, it will come back to this success callback function. And if there is an error, it will come to the error callback function. All right, so the forecast URL, I'm simply going to copy and paste this default URL here. All right, so that's my forecast URL. We'll come back to how we can make this URL more dynamic so we can select the different cities and current location. But for now, the default location is Los Angeles. Then we have the JSON callback. So let's make this call. Let's go back to our Good Weather app in the browser. And I'll hit refresh. Of course, nothing happens because visually we're not doing anything. Okay, so we're going to open up the console. You can either do that using the tools functionality, tools and developer tools. I usually remember the shortcut, so I just use the shortcut. And there is our object that's returned to us. So if I open that up, it's the same JSON data that we saw when we opened up that URL in a separate tab. So we are getting back that data and our AJAX call is successful. How do I know that this JSON piece stuff worked or what this JSON piece stuff looks like? Well, if I go to network and it says no network traffic was captured, well, let's hit refresh again and then it'll capture all the network traffic. And that's our last network call. That's our AJAX call. And if I click there, it will show me what the data looks like when it was returned. So as you can see, it says JSON callback, and then JSON callback is in parentheses, and then our data is inside the parentheses. So basically, it's sending that data to this, ghost function called JSON callback, and then jQuery captures that data and it returns it to this success function. Can we override the JSON callback? We surely can. So if we specify function, I'm just going to copy this here, JSON callback, and usually it'll return data. I mean, that argument can be named anything, but it is returning one argument to us to this callback function. And that argument is usually the data that's being returned. If I do a console.log, I'm going to say JSON callback, and then another console.log, I'm going to output the data. Let me comment out the console here so that it's not conflicted, and hit refresh. And if I go to the console, once again, it is calling the function JSON callback, and there's all the data. But we don't need to specify JSON callback. We can if we want to, but we want to use the success and error, because if there is an error, we want to do something with that. So I'm going to delete this JSON callback here. So upon success, we want to display this data in our content panel. So here where we had specified current temperature ID, I'm going to copy this. And instead of just displaying static data, we're going to take the data that's coming to us from this AJAX call and display it there. So using jQuery, and jQuery has a function called HTML. I'm going to use that HTML function to display this data that's coming back to us. So the data is in this argument called JSON. So there's JSON. Let me go back here and see what attributes I can use. So there is the currently object, and within the currently object, I have temperature, which is right there. And I have something called icon, and I have something called summary. So we need to use these three pieces of data, which is icon, summary, and temperature. So the first thing that we need to access is the currently object. After that is temperature. Plus, I need to copy and paste the HTML special character and F. So now if I refresh, it should show me the current temperature in Los Angeles, which is 65 degrees. Next, I want it to display the current summary. So I copied the current summary ID. That's all I did here. So going back here, pound current summary .html. Once again, I'm going to get data from JSON. Currently, it's called summary. I hit save and hit refresh. And as you can see, it shows clear. Now this number has a decimal place. I can easily round that number because it's just nice to see a nice round number when you're looking at weather. And the next thing I want to do is make sure that I display the right icon. So for our current temp div tag, I want to change the attribute of data icon. But what will I change it to? Well, if we go to the documentation for forecast.io, so here I am going to the API docs. Here it shows me that the icon attribute returns all of these different values. You know, it has clear day, clear night, rain, snow, sleet, all of these various attributes. Now, we know the meteocons, the icons that we downloaded from this other website. Let me just open that up real quick. So all of these meteocons have an icon associated to a letter. So what we can do is create that association. We know what the values are going to be returned to us. We can match that value with a letter that's corresponding to the icon. So for example, B is clear, right? I mean, it's the icon for sunshine. And if I go back to the API, let me just close a few of these tabs. So if I go back to the API, it says clear day. It sends us back this icon attribute that says clear day. So right away, I know I need to map clear day to the letter B because that's the icon for sunshine. And so on and so forth. We can map each one of these, clear night, rain, snow, with one of these icons. So we need to create an associative array in our JavaScript. Okay, so we'll do var icons equals clear day colon B. And then we need to do that with each one of them. I've already done this, so I'm not going to sit here and type. Just going to copy and paste it in. Oops. So here, I have mapped each one of those values to a letter that is associated to that particular icon. So the data icon is basically taking my icons associative array, and I have to pass it the data that's coming from the JSON. So it's json.currently.icon. Right? It's that value, and then it maps that value to my associative array, and then it displays a single letter. How do I know it says icon? Well, if we go back to our object here in the console and open up currently, as you can see there, it says icon clear day. I saved this, and I'm going to refresh, and it shows the right icon. That's the sunshine icon, clear day. It's rounding up the number, and it just shows everything that it's supposed to. Now, the current location, we're going to fix that once we add more functionality to the cities. So we already have this working. We have live data coming from a third-party API, and we have that displaying in our app. So our app is almost there. We're just missing a few things like the city panel that we have on the left. We haven't had that working yet. So let's get that working. So back in our HTML file, as you'll notice that we had associated a class with every href tag that had a city associated to it. And what I want to do is override the click functionality for these href tags. And we can do that in our document.ready. So I'll say a.city. So whenever you see a.city, bind the click functionality. So what happens when a user clicks on a city? Well, I want to call a function called loadCity. Now, for us to call a function named loadCity, I have to pass it the name of the city, so which is the value of this href tag. So it would be like Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami. So I'm going to simply say this.html. Okay, so let's create this function called loadCity. So the argument would be city because we're getting the name of the city. So first thing I want to do is make sure that I change the location, right? We have this location that's displayed here, which we have given the ID location. So I want to make sure that we update that to the name that was selected in the left panel. So location.html city. And the next thing I want to do is I want to load the weather for that particular city. Now, for me to load the weather for that particular city, I have to get the latitude and longitude associated with each of these cities. For that, we want to create yet another array, an associative array. I'm going to call this cities. And what we'll do here is specify the name of the city. So in this case, let's say it's, what's the first city? That's Chicago, all right? So it's Chicago, colon. We will be using the HTML5 geolocation API, which means that for the current location, we will use the browser's ability to give us the latitude and longitude of the user's current location. And the way that is structured is that it has an attribute called, or an object called coord, and it has latitude and longitude associated to it. So it's not directly like, give me latitude and longitude. It's embedded within an object called coord or coordinates. So I'm going to follow that same convention here. And within that, we have lat and long. Okay, so how did I find out the latitude and longitude for each one of these cities? You can go to this website called geocoder.us, and any address that you put here, it will give you the latitude and longitude for that city. So for example, if I click here on Los Angeles, it'll show me the latitude and longitude for that particular location, but as long as that location is within the city of Los Angeles. So I just copied and pasted that latitude and longitude. So that's how I got latitude and longitude information for each one of those cities. And I just basically copy it in there. I've already created this, so I'm going to copy and paste my associative array. So there we have it. We have New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, San Francisco, Miami, and current location, which is nothing. Okay, so I'll say load weather, and the load weather will access cities, or rather the cities associative array that I have here. And we are being passed the city argument, so basically I need to pass city. Now I did make this, all the names of the cities are title cased, so I need to make sure that it is converted to lowercase when I pass it. Make sure there's a capital C there, so it should be to lowercase. And that should work. So let's go back here and refresh our application. I'm going to get rid of the console. So once I click on this, and let's say click on Chicago, or click on Los Angeles. So that's not changing the weather because we haven't changed the URL to have the latitude and longitude. We need to actually, change the load weather function to take in the latitude and longitude, which I haven't done yet. So I'm going to pass in a parameter called city chords and create a function, create a variable called lat_long, which is going to be a string representation of latitude and longitude. So let's say city chords dot. All right, basically we're creating a string representation that has latitude separated by a comma, and then it has longitude. Because as you can see, that's what the forecast IO URL expects us to pass it, latitude and longitude separated by a comma. So I'm going to simply remove this here, say plus, and the lat_long variable that I just created in the previous line. So now if we go back and hit refresh, as you can see, it says 65 degrees. So if we select, let's say, Miami. Okay, I guess we have to do a bit of debugging here to figure out what's going on. So let's put a console log inside the load weather function. And I'll hit refresh again, open up the console, and it says cannot read property chords of undefined. So initially when I'm loading the weather, I don't specify anything, and that's why the app is not working. So in our document.ready, load weather should have something in there. So by default, let's just specify Chicago. Okay, so now when I hit refresh, so it says it cannot read the property latitude. And once again, I am loading the weather function directly. I should be loading city and not weather, because load weather is now expecting to receive a city object as an argument. So now if I say load city, which in turn will call load weather. So let's go back here and hit refresh, and third time's the charm. Now it's working. If I click on menu and hit Los Angeles, and there is the weather for Los Angeles. And if I click San Francisco, there is the weather for San Francisco. So our app's working. The only thing that's missing is the current location, because the current location doesn't work. We need to get that using the HTML5 API. So let's figure out how we can access the HTML5 API. So the first thing we'll do is in our load city function, we will write an if statement. So let's say if city to lowercase equals current location, then we want to call the HTML5 API to get the latitude and longitude of the current location. Else, just go ahead and load the city, load the weather of that particular city. Since we're specifying curly braces, so let's keep that consistent. So before we access the HTML5 API, we need to make sure that the browser has the capability to get us the latitude and longitude information. And you do that by saying if navigator.geolocation. If navigator.geolocation, which means that it has the capability to access the location coordinates, the latitude and longitude of the user, then let's go ahead and access it. So geolocation, get current position. Now, get current position is a function that expects two callback methods. So you can, if it's successful, pass it a callback function. If it fails, pass it yet another callback function. So that's the first two parameters. So if it's successful, we'll just go ahead and call load weather because it's passing it the latitude and longitude in that coords object. So I'll say load weather. Now, if it fails, we should either display an error or we can load a default. And that's what I prefer doing here. If it fails, let's just call load default city. We don't have that function, but we will write that function. And basically, failure could be either it wasn't able to successfully get the information or the user denied to give you access to that information. Because you will notice that every time, not every time, but the first time that the application is presented to the user will be able to allow or deny access to their location. And if they deny access, then you actually want to do something with that. And that's what the failure callback function is for. You can either display a message to the user saying like, well, if you don't give me your location, I can't display this data to you, or just display some default data. And that's what we'll do in this case. And then else, if the user does not have the capability of, the browser does not have the capability to access a user's location, once again, we want to, display something. So we'll just say load default city. Okay, so what does the load default city function look like? Well, we'll say function default, should say load default city. And it's simply going to call the load city function with a default city. So I'm just going to say New York. That'll be our default city, our fallback city. So if you don't have the capabilities, you'll always just see New York's weather, which is not a bad thing. Okay, so I think we are ready. Let's go back here and hit refresh. Now if I click on the menu, I should be able to select current location, and it gives me the weather for where I am right now, which is Orlando. It says sprinkling, and it says current location. If we wanted to display the actual location of the user, that would be a bit more complicated because it would involve using Google Maps API to reverse geocode. So what reverse geocode means is that you would pass Google Maps API the latitude and longitude of the current user, and then they would tell you what city, state, country that user belonged to. That's probably for another workshop. I don't think we'll be covering that because that's very complicated. But you can surely look up the Google Maps API and search for reverse geocoding on how to do that. So we're almost done with this app. We have all the functionality working. It looks great. So let's check out how it looks like in an actual device, a mobile device rather. So here I have the simulator open, and I'm going to open up the Good Weather app. And this is what it looks like, which is great. And I have the option of saving that to my home screen. Now, when I save it to my home screen, it gives me a preview of what that page looks like, and then it puts this, dot name over there. What I want it to display is a nice little icon, and I don't want any of the toolbars to show, so that it almost looks like a native app. So let's see how we can go about doing that. Well, the first thing I need to do is add a few icons, and I've already created these icons. Let me show you what they look like. So these icons are in two different sizes. The first size is 57 by 57, and the retina size is 114 by 114. So you would have to create them and then name them in such a way with the retina size being at 2x. So I'm going to copy these two images into my project. I'm going to copy it to this images folder. Now going back to Sublime Text, there is a meta tag, or there's a link tag that specifies the Apple icon, or rather icons for the iOS devices. This would work for any iPhone or iPad device. And then you specify where the icon is located. So that solves the icon issue. Next, if you want this to be a full screen application, well, then you can specify a meta tag that says mobile web app capable. And you can say content equals yes. So let's go back to the simulator. I'm going to delete this. Open up Safari once again. All right, so there's my app, and by default, as you can see, it shows Chicago. And it says add to home screen, and now you can see the icon that I added shows up. So I can add it to the home screen. I can name this whatever I want, so I can change the name if I like. There it is, and if I click on it, it shows as a full screen app, and that's exactly what I wanted. Now you can't really tell the distinction between a mobile app or a native app. So I clicked on current location. It says, would you like to use your current location? I say, okay. And it gives me access to the current location. I can change it, and it works like any native app would work. That's the beauty of jQuery Mobile and using AJAX services. We built a fully functioning weather application using jQuery Mobile, AJAX services, and a third-party API. Where do you go from here? Well, you can add so many features to this application based on the jQuery Mobile API, where there are so many UI components that you can implement and integrate, and the Forecast API, which has feature-rich data up to the minute, hour, daily. So go ahead and go crazy. Add more features and functionality to this application, and do share it in our forums if you do. This is Amit, and it has been a pleasure. See you again.